All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about something that's been on my mind lately, and that is how much the world has changed in regards to criticizing Sodom and criticizing really the rainbow mafia, if you know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. So back in the day, back in 2013, is when I really began to write against Sodom. It's when I really began to write against the so-called LGBTQ whatever agenda, and I just call it Sodom. People call it LGBTQ whatever. I don't really like using the acronym because it's just weird. I just call it Sodom because that's what it is. People like to make these weird categories, and they say, well, there's conservative LGBT and there's liberal, and the conservatives are cool and the liberals are bad, and blah blah blah. No, to me, it's all freaking Sodom. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. It's all the same damn thing. So anyway, back in 2013, and I also want to say back in 2012 is when I really started to write against this evil. It's when I really began to write against this evil, and I was writing against Sodom and all this stuff. And there is a big difference between then and now as to how people respond to criticism against Sodom and the whole rainbow agenda, the whole rainbow mafia. So back in 2012 and 2013, there was this weird and almost sudden explosion of popularity for Sodom. It was even infecting the Christians. You had conservatives being infected by this whole thing, and there were people who were basically saying that Sodom is cool, or they were saying we have to pray for Sodom, we have to embrace the citizens of the Republic of Sodom, bring them into the church, we have to love them, we have to cherish them and embrace them and all this crap. And if someone like myself came along and said that's wrong, you guys are embracing Sodom, you guys are being lenient on Sodom, you guys are enabling Sodom to rise up and to enter the Christian ranks, to enter conservative ranks, I would be attacked for saying things like that. Other people would be attacked for saying things like that because they were seen as being absent of love. They were seen as not having the love of Christ in them, and Christ wants us to love everyone, including Sodom. And it was just really sickening. And so one thing that I noticed is that back in 2013, it was insane. It was truly insane because I was one of the few people online who was really writing against this agenda, really working to expose it. And the hatred that I got from so-called conservatives and Christians, evangelicals, Catholics, was immense. It was insane. I was told so many times by so-called Christians that I was unloving. And then you have all the conservatives. And back in those days, the conservatives, and I don't think they've changed all that much, but I don't think they've changed at all. I'll be honest with you. But back in the day, the conservatives were really open about their desire to use Sodom as a proxy against the Democrats, their desire to embrace Sodom, to make an alliance with Sodom, to go against the Democrats. And so they would utilize the gay Republicans. They would work with gay conservatives, gay Christians. And if you resisted this, if you said, hey, this is wrong, if you exposed it, if you wrote against it, you would be attacked, and they would tell you, you don't understand, this is a strategic war. Or they would say things like, we have to work with these people because it's our way of giving it to the libs. It's our way of just attacking the left because here we have a gay conservative and the liberals want to have a monopoly over Sodom. And we want to show the world that, hey, we also have Sodom on our side. It's not just the liberals who Sodom is siding with. Sodom is also siding with the conservatives. And so we are flipping the script. We're flipping the whole story against the left. We're going against the liberals this way. And now it's crazy because the liberals are accusing us of being homophobic, but all we have to do is show them all of our gay allies, to expose them and to show that they're wrong. And I'm thinking, what the hell are you guys doing? What in the world are you guys doing? You guys are allying with Sodom. And I remember I think it was back in 2012, you had Steve Crowder saying that we should work with the gay Republicans, what do they call themselves? Log cabin Republicans. You had Andrew Breitbart pushing for that crap. The entire American/Western right-wing apparatus was all about working with Sodom. And I remember those days. I remember writing against Sodom and just being attacked incessantly by Christians and conservatives, negative comments. Hell, I remember back in 2014, I personally exposed a sexual predator priest who was known in the Catholic Church. He was a cleric. He was, in fact, a Monsignor. His name was Monsignor Yarbrough, And Yarbrough was a sexual predator, and he actually sexually assaulted a young man in his church. And Mr. Yarbrough, Monsignor Yarbrough, invited me to meet up with him at his office, and I did not want to go into his office because that's where he sexually assaulted a young man. He sexually assaulted a young man in his office. So I said, well, I prefer that we meet at a public place. So we met at a public place, and I had my dad with me. He was pretending not to be with me. He was sitting in the table adjacent to ours, and my dad had a little GoPro camera on his wrist. It looked like we made it look like a wristwatch, and my father was filming the entire exchange. And I brought up the fact that this guy was a sexual predator. I confronted him about the fact that he sexually assaulted a young man, and this guy gets up and he runs away, and I'm yelling at him. And it was freaking epic. I actually personally exposed this guy, put the video out online, and I got thousands of views for that video, and I got tons of comments. And almost all of the comments, almost all of them, were saying how bad I was, how bad Ted is. Ted is so wrong for doing this. And I had Catholics attacking me. I had conservatives attacking me, supposed conservatives attacking me. And I had Catholics tell me, well, did you go to the bishop? Why didn't you go to the bishop? Why didn't you go to the archdiocese of whatever? Blah, 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 blah. And they were attacking me when I was simply trying to help society, help the Catholic community by exposing this freak, exposing this sexual predator who was preying on young men. And I was being attacked for that. And that was back in 2014. And also, I remember Dennis Prager coming out on the Dave Rubin show saying, well, the Bible says men, you can be attracted to boys and girls. And then he says, I don't mean 9-year-old boys, I mean 15-year-olds. And it was just so absolutely sickening.
You're in my home studio. You're in my home. I live here with a man.
I am as comfortable with these two couples as with heterosexual couples.
And by the way, for the record, right before we started, you asked me if I was married. You didn't know if I was straight or gay. And I didn't sense that you cared in any way.
And then my immediate concern was, how did you meet?
Yeah, how did
I want to hear your romance.
Right.
I'm as interested as if it was a woman. Well, I assume you'd rather be on a political channel than a gay channel.
Yeah.
You're not defined by your gayness.
This is as gay as it gets.
Yes. Normal is not defined by your sexual orientation.
Yeah.
That's what normal. I'm not saying heterosexual is more normal. By the way, I actually believe bisexual is the norm. The Bible said, men, you are as happy with boys, I don't mean 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds, just as a grown man is happy with a 15-year-old girl. But in that sense, homosexuals and heterosexuals are identical.
And I remember there was no one exposing that. And that video, that David Rubin and Dennis Prager conversation on YouTube, it had tons of views. It had at least hundreds of thousands of views, and there were tons of comments. Not one comment saying, what the hell is Dennis Prager talking about? Why the hell is Dennis Prager saying this? Not one single comment. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to take that clip from the interview and I'm going to expose Dennis Prager, because for some strange oddball reason, none of these Christians who watched this interview thought that what Dennis Prager said was strange enough to expose. So I did a video, I showed the clips of Dennis Prager saying these things. And do you know how many people supported me? Almost none. Almost nobody supported me. There was one guy on YouTube who backed me up. He was an African-American gentleman. He called himself Dr. Common Sense, and he had a big YouTube channel, I remember, and YouTube got rid of him. But he was the only guy who did a video in support of what I was showing, in support of what I was saying about Dennis Prager. No one else did. And the video that I uploaded onto YouTube showing Prager saying these terrible things about the Bible got a lot of views, and it got a lot of comments, and almost all the comments were saying, Ted, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. People that someone that I know personally even contacted me saying, Ted, you're wrong about Prager. You're wrong. That's not what Prager was saying. And I'm like, it's right there in plain view, freaking sight. What the hell is wrong with you? My point is that back in 2013, 2014, 15, 16, 17, in those years, allying with Sodom was very, very popular. Very popular. And allying with conservatives, so-called conservatives who are members of Sodom, allying with gay Republicans was considered the thing to do. And if you spoke out against it, you were seen as mean-spirited, evil, whatever, or just wrong or out of touch, or you were seen as backwards or a caveman and all that. And then something happened. I want to say at around, 2019, 2020, something happened where America just changed, where the Western world dramatically changed. And all of a sudden, it is now cool to attack the LGBT, to attack Sodom. And now, if you do a video about Sodom and the dangers of Sodom, it's like, wow, you get a lot of positive comments. You get a ton of positive comments. And a lot of this has to do with the pushing of wokeism in movies and video games. And I talked about this a little bit on my stream today, but I thought I would elaborate more on this. So you have, for example, these big video games coming out, these big budget games coming out, and they have a transgender message in them. So there's what's the name of that game? Dragon Age, the Veil Guard or whatever the hell it is. And that was a big budget game. They put a ton of money in that game. I forgot exactly how much money, but it was maybe over 100 million or something like that. Lots of money. Let's just put it that way. And there is blatant transgenderism in the game. The game, I mean, when you're playing the game, I've never played it. I'll never give money to that bullshit. But I've watched gameplay on YouTube of the game. And the game makes you conform with a transgender ideology as you're playing it. So you're playing the game, and you know how in a lot of games they give you different options to pick, and the option that you choose will sort of pave the story to a certain way. So if you pick this option, okay, this is going to happen later on in the story. If you pick this other option, then it's going to lead you down to another path or whatever. So there's all these different options that you can pick in the game, and every option, I saw this one clip where in one instance of the game, every option available to you basically got you to conform to transgenderism. And I saw Asmongold playing it, and he tried to find the option that didn't get your character to become trans, but every single option led to transgenderism. And that pissed off a lot of people. And so for some strange reason, a lot of people have no issue with the L, the G, and the B, but they have huge issues with the T, and even other members of the alphabet mafia, the L's, the B's, and the G's, will actually express their rage and their disapproval of the way that the T has conducted itself. And so there has been huge outrage against Sodom, huge outrage, and this all sprung from from people's frustrations and people's grievances with the transgender ideology, where you have men dressed up as women and they're talking to children and they're reading books to kids in libraries and all this weird shit. And so there's a lot of outrage, and that outrage, that collective outrage, has now made it trendy and cool and more acceptable to actually attack Sodom. And one more thing that I have noticed about all this is that YouTube all of a sudden is becoming less censoring. Facebook all of a sudden is becoming less censoring. Back in the day, I remember back in 2000 and I want to say 18 or 19, I did a video about this major pedophile ring that was discovered in France. It was exposed, and the French police raided the whole thing and all that. They made tons of arrests and all that. But I remember doing a whole video on this pedophile ring in France, and how there was this Lutheran or some kind of a Protestant pastor who was involved, and there was a Catholic priest who was involved, and it was just really, it was just evil and just absolutely bizarre. And I remember talking about how the Protestant minister who was involved was working with transgender people in France. And I mentioned that in the video, and YouTube took the video down. And I appealed it, and YouTube said, no, it has to stay down because it's whatever, homophobic and all this stuff. Now I'm noticing tons of videos on YouTube, tons of posts on Facebook and other social media platforms talking about Sodom, talking about topics that would have been considered very, very sensitive stuff 6-7 years ago. So there's a big shift in the vibe. There's a big shift. There's a big change going on in the world. The world is, when it comes to exposing and writing against Sodom, the world has changed from the last 10 plus years, because I remember, like I said, back in 2012, 2013, 2014, people were not on your side. Christians were not on your side. Evangelicals were not really on your side. For the most part, they weren't. Now, they would agree with you that gay marriage is wrong and all this stuff, but to actually go out of your way to expose this type of thing, to write against it in a serious Christian manner, people really weren't all for it. And in those days, it was all about loving Sodom, embracing them, bringing Sodom to church and all this crap. And that's what they were pushing. You had these Chick-fil-A Christians that were pushing that garbage as well. And nowadays, there seems to be a much stronger stance against Sodom. Why is this? Well, I think a lot of this is just a huge deception. Because when you look at a lot of the rhetoric, or most of the rhetoric against Sodom, most of it is against transgenderism. And I suspect what we're going to see more of is exactly what we saw back in 2015, 16, 17, those years, where you had these conservatives who were members of Sodom, people like Milo, coming out and becoming really, really popular. And I think that sort of thing is going to happen again. And then what you're going to have, and you've already seen this, are just these members of Sodom coming out and saying, hey, Christians, conservatives, we agree with you on transgenderism. We also think that it's wrong and blah, blah, blah. We've already seen this sort of thing before. And Christians fell for it when it was being done by people like Milo or people like Andrew Sullivan. Christians fell for it. Conservatives fell for it. They thought it was great. They said, oh, look, a member of Sodom who's on our side. What they don't realize, or really what they refuse to realize, is that what these members of Sodom are doing is they're actually undermining the whole Christian movement in America. They're undermining the conservative movement in America, because they're getting the conservatives to accept a part of the alphabet mafia in the name of rejecting just one faction of the alphabet mafia. And so if you say, okay, I'm against this agenda, they say, great, we agree with you. Now embrace our allies here who are also members of Sodom. And then you say, well, wait a second, this guy's a member of Sodom. And then the Christians, these particular Christians, they're fake Christians, these pseudo-Christians, and these conservatives and these pseudo-Catholics will come out and say, yeah, but they're our allies. They can help us against the left. And it's like, okay, this bullshit never ends. It's the same damn story. So I don't really have any sort of huge optimism. I mean, I'm glad that people are against the whole transgender agenda, but I don't really have immense optimism for this this national outrage against the Sodom movement, because I know, and I've already seen this, that the Sodom movement will have ways to get conservatives to embrace Sodom yet again. And it reminds me of this conversation that I had years ago. I knew this guy who worked for a big right-wing radio broadcasting network. And I remember him and I got into this huge argument. In fact, I want to say this was the last conversation that we ever had, because we got into this argument. And I told him, I said, we should not be embracing Sodom at all. And he said, what are you talking about? They're our allies. And this was a guy who was, I mean, his brain was deep into the whole Twitter right-wingism. He was a fan of Milo. He was a huge fan of all these right-wing figureheads that were really big on Twitter at one point in time. He was just in that world. And he told me, he said, what are you talking about? We need Sodom because it's an ally against the left. And this guy was a supposed Christian. And I said, what are you talking about? Don't you understand that at the end of the day, no matter how you look at it, Sodom is Sodom. That is it. Sodom is Sodom. And this guy just didn't give a shit, no matter what I would tell this guy. And this is why I do not like to debate. Don't take this the wrong way, but I really don't like to debate people in general. And the thing is, the one thing that I've noticed is when I debate with Americans, they just never really want to accept anything you say, no matter how right you are. And I gave them some clear-cut facts about the problems, about this phenomenon in which you have Sodom amongst the conservative movement. And I talked to him about Milo. I think I brought up Dennis Prager with him. And no matter what I would tell this guy, he just wouldn't give a damn. He just kept telling me the same thing. We must embrace and accept Sodom. And it's like, okay, I just throw my hands in the air. And that's why you see people like Andrew Clavin talking about how conservatives need to embrace Sodom, how St. Paul was wrong about what he wrote against Sodom. That sort of bullshit is still there. And conservatives need to be really, really careful and recognize this dark reality about the political world. The political world is filled with people who are pro-Sodom. A lot of the funders for right-wing outlets are people who are pro-Sodom. I know this for a fact because our website, shootbot.com, was getting funded every single year by these big billionaires or by a billionaire, I should say, by a big billionaire who was known to be a funder for right-wing media outlets, conservative media outlets. And the moment that we started talking against Sodom, this billionaire's wife calls us up and says, hey, you guys better stop or else we're not going to give you any more money. We said, take the money and shove it. And that's exactly what happened. So it's just, it's people need to be very aware of this reality. The people who fund all these right-wing movements, they are people, I don't know about all of them, but I will at least say with certainty that almost all of them are people who want to use their money to advance Sodom. If you look at all these big podcasters that a lot of righties are liking, people like Joe Rogan, people like I don't know, that Konstantin Kisin guy, a lot of these big podcasters are people who push Sodom. And so if you want to fight against the left, understand that these people want you to fight the left in conjunction with supporting Sodom. And that's the reality at the end of the day. Jesus was very clear about Sodom. He said, remember Lot's wife. Do not be like Lot's wife, turning around to see Sodom, to sympathize with Sodom, only to turn into a pillar of salt. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.